online. The title of the talk is Machine Learning Based User-Centric Efficient Immersive Media Transmission. Before I request ma'am to just give the talk, I would like to just ask Swagata to come and just welcome. Okay, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Ma'am, Dr. Chetna Signal, you can just please start your talk. Thank you.
All right, I'll just share my screen and then I'll start. Thank you for the introduction, and today I will be discussing about machine learning based.
Ma'am, excuse me.
Yes.
Ma'am, excuse me. I'm very sorry. I'd like to just introduce you, please, to the members over here. Sorry for the small confusion over here. Can I just take that ahead?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for that. Yeah, dear audience, Dr. Chetna Signal is an IEEE senior member, currently a guest researcher at Computer Science, Rice Research Institutes of Sweden, and is an assistant professor with the Department of Electronics and Electrical Communication Engineering, IIT Kharagpur. She received MTech and PhD degrees from the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Delhi. She has been awarded DST Inspire Faculty Fellowship, ERCM Fellowship, and Pune University Gold Medal in Engineering. Her research interests include next generation heterogeneous wireless networks, with emphasis on cross-layer optimization, adaptive multimedia services, energy efficiency, and resource allocation. Ma'am, we are very happy to just have you here. You can just please take a call. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So today I'll discuss about machine learning based user-centric efficient immersive media transmission. So this immersive media transmission is something that is gaining popularity in today's date because we hear about metaverse and XR VR applications that are becoming more prevalent and are more reachable to many users over the network, over the wireless network. So overall, I'll discuss about two research problems that we have solved. One is related to immersive multimedia broadcast, wherein we use machine learning for certain aspects of solving this. So for solving this multimedia broadcast of this 360-degree video. And the second research problem that I'll discuss about is how we can predict the video QoE. And this particular model can also be used for the immersive multimedia content. So overall, the motivation behind actually solving these problems is that overall the demand for video data and streaming services has been increasing exponentially over the past few years. And we see that there is a massive increase in the XR VR data as well, along with the other types of video content that is being sent across over the wireless network. So further motivating from the perspective of the latest development in the wireless network domain, we see that over the past few years, and currently also, the several releases are being actually developed and frozen for the 3GPP, 5G and 6G standard development. So currently we stand here in the Q4 of 2022 and already release 18 is introduced. And if we look at the release 18, we see that there is a lot of focus on the XR 5G multicast broadcast services, video codec for 5G, and QoE enhancement, along with the many other work items which are introduced. So today what I'll be discussing actually falls under these work items that I have highlighted here from the release 18. And overall, if we look at the 5G standard, this again has been picked up from the 3GPP website. We see that the 3D video, ultra high definition screens, augmented reality, XR, VR content, multimedia, multicast and broadcast services, all of this has a lot of emphasis in the 5G standard as well. So whatever we are discussing now is actually relevant from the development of the futuristic wireless network standards. So overall, giving a little bit of background about what is 360-degree video, or when I say immersive multimedia, what does it mean? So you can imagine as a viewer, the viewer wears these glasses which help them visualize the 360-degree video content. And from the viewport perspective, there are three angles that are actually captured by this device, which is worn on the user's head. So the three angles are the yaw, pitch, and roll. And these are actually related to each other and the head position. So overall, you can imagine it to be something like a sphere, and the viewer is at the center of the sphere and is looking at a particular direction. So you can imagine like a globe which is being opened up. So when you open up a globe, you can see the maps, like, right? The world map is generally in the 2D printed state, right? But it actually comes from the shape of the earth, which is not 2D, but is rather a 3D sphere-like shape, right? So in a similar manner, what we do is we open up the sphere, and we open up in the form of a 2D rectangular space, and we divide the space into smaller portions known as tiles. This is a very popular and a prevalent technique that is used for the immersive multimedia transmission, right? So this type of a mapping is known as the equirectangular mapping of this 360-degree sphere into the 2D space. Now, whenever a viewer is looking at a particular direction, that direction is known as the viewport, and that is actually mapped to the number of tiles which need to be shown to the user. Because if you look at this user, currently is looking in this space, so obviously on his glasses, the other content will not be rendered till the time the viewer doesn't change their direction of viewing, right? So overall, if you want to make the network resource utilization more efficient, we would rather use the resources for sending the most relevant content, which is this portion right now, and the rest of the content could be sent at a lower quality level, right? So that is what we try to do. Now, the challenge in this problem is furthermore because we're talking about a broadcast scenario. So we have like many users, each of them is watching the broadcast 360-degree video in different directions. So what we want is that for every user, they should be getting the content, right? So we cannot just send one small portion of the video, but we have to send many portions of the video like this, right? And for doing that, like in real time, it's not possible, because if you know that the feedback also, if it is sent to the server, that would take some time, right? And the system cannot actually wait. So the viewer will not be waiting that now they are watching the video in a particular direction and the feedback is sent and the server is actually sending that information. Rather, we want a seamless solution, right? So for the seamless solution, we want some kind of a prediction to happen. Now, this is where the machine learning is useful. The machine learning helps in predicting where the viewers are going to be looking in the next instant. And based on that, the server beforehand starts sending that information to the base station from where the information is broadcast. Now, in the 5G standard, we have something known as the MBSFN area. This was also there in the 4G standard, wherein for broadcast, the overall geographical region is actually grouped together where the broadcast will happen. Now, this is slightly different from your conventional, what should I say, the TV content that you get, because the TV content that we get is also broadcast in nature, but what we get in our homes is usually through the satellite transmission, right? Here, this is slightly different because we're talking about the cellular resource to actually broadcast the multimedia content. So the challenge is that the resource is not just there for broadcast, but it has to support the normal unicast services as well. So overall, where do we use machine learning here? We use the machine learning in forecasting the user's viewport prediction. And the second aspect where we use machine learning is in the resource allocation. So what we try to do is we use reinforcement learning for the resource allocation part, and we use LSTM forecast for predicting the user's viewport. So overall, in order to optimize the network resources, we need some kind of an analytical modeling of the video rate and the quality. So we all know when the video content is encoded at a higher quantization parameter, the corresponding data rate requirement reduces, but also the distortion correspondingly increases and the quality reduces. So ideally what we want is we want to balance the two things together. That is the data rate requirement and the quality, because we cannot just for saving the network resources, we cannot just drop the data rate by using a high quantization parameter, thereby actually increasing the distortion and reducing quality, because then that is against what we want to offer to the users in the system, right? So this is where the overall resource allocation is relevant. That is, we try to find how much network resource is available and how much can we drop the data rate such that we can still maintain the quality at a reasonable level. So overall, we have actually designed the problem into two parts. The first is focusing at minimizing the distortion of the video. And the second problem that we developed was actually serving more users. So this CR here is the churn rate. Churn rate is the number of users that could not be served in the system. So if we try to focus on serving more users, then of course we would try to reach lower data rates so that more users can be reached in the broadcast scenario, right? Whereas if we talk about distortion minimization, then we are trying to maximize the quality so that overall whatever users are served, highest quality could be guaranteed to them. And overall, this is constrained in terms of the data rate requirement and the capacity of the network, and also how many G-Node Bs are participating and all of their resources, and also the adaptive encoding of the information, that is your multimedia content, that is constrained by the encoder parameters, right? So these are some of the constraints. So overall, this distortion that is being minimized in this problem is actually defined based on the viewport. So whenever a viewer is watching the immersive content in a particular direction, we want to minimize the distortion for that piece of information rather than for everything that is not even being viewed, right? And similarly, the video quality is based on this distortion. And the system churn rate for the second problem here is defined by the number of users that are getting dropped in the system. So for evaluating this, we are considering the SINR of the users, which is lesser than the one being supported by the system. And also where the quality is actually lesser than the minimum acceptable quality. So overall, for solving this problem, what we use is the reinforcement learning solution using the deep deterministic policy gradient algorithm. So overall, what we try to do is, this is what is being performed. So there is the multimedia server. It is sending the program tiles in these buffers that are shown here, and it is being broadcast on the resources available over the network in this manner. So P programs corresponding to many users requesting for these programs is actually being sent based on the predicted information, what portion of the video each of these users is viewing. So let's look at some results, right? So since I mentioned that we are using LSTM, so LSTM stands for long short-term memory. That means the prediction in the future will depend upon the immediate past as well as the long-term average past, right? So we all understand that a viewer, when viewing in a particular direction, cannot change the angle of view rapidly, right? Because there is some limitation with respect to how fast you can move your head, right? So here, when I talk about this system is actually trying to optimize per second. So within a second, there is a maximum span which you can actually move your head towards, right? So based on the previous pattern of the head movement, the future is predicted. So we have evaluated the LSTM with update here. And what we see is the RMSE that is offered is actually less than 0.1. And I'll just straight away go to show that why is this significant. So if you look at the other ways to predict, that is linear regression, persistent, normal LSTM encoder decoder, then the RMSE is much higher. But what we are offering is LSTM with update, which is resulting in an RMSE which is nearly negligible. And why is this important? This is important because the server can actually use this predicted information because it is very accurate, right? Beforehand, if the server knows that where the viewers are going to be seen, then correspondingly that information gets encoded efficiently. Okay, a few other things for creating, and this is the other set of results for this viewport prediction, wherein we see that how much training data can be used for predicting and how many training epochs can be used for resulting the RMSE to a very negligible or a small value. Apart from this, a second important aspect is creating these MBSFN areas, right? So many users exist in the geographical space and all of them are asking for different content, right? So you can imagine it's something similar to the television that we have in our homes and viewers are watching different programs, right? So over here, we need to cluster these users based on what they are requesting so that we don't waste the network resources sending everything, right? So for clustering, what we use is the k-means clustering, and there is a motivation behind doing that. Now, there are different clustering methods. We compared the k-means, k-medoid, and fuzzy c-means, and since k-means gives a performance which is better than the other two in terms of Euclidean distance, silhouette coefficient, and also what we find is that the number of clusters is not always predefined. So we cannot always use like 5 clusters or 10 clusters. This is actually dependent upon the scenario. So because we see a peak here and we also see a knee at a particular point in the Euclidean distance, and that tells us that the number of clusters can also be optimized based on the actual scenario. So based on these results, we end up using the k-means algorithm for clustering and also using the optimum number of clusters for the given scenario. And by doing that, what we essentially achieve is also that the system aggregate data rate is actually maximized. And as compared to the other schemes in the literature, what we see is the proposed scheme is resulting in a higher system aggregate data rate. In terms of the quality, distortion, and churn rate, we compared with a state-of-the-art VRcast technique, and we see that this actually, our proposed technique is resulting in a higher quality and a lesser distortion and a lesser churn rate. Churn rate is the number of users getting dropped in the system. And also the quality for different users in the system is actually improving. And this tells us why and how using machine learning in the form of reinforcement learning, in the form of user information prediction, actually helps us in improving the performance of the system overall. So the key important points here for the proposed technique is that it improves the overall video quality, serves an increased number of heterogeneous users, and this could also be extended to include complex scenarios with revenue models in the next generation cellular networks. The next problem that I will discuss is about QoE prediction. Now, what is QoE? QoE is your quality of user experience. It is actually evaluated in terms of the mean opinion score, right? So mean opinion score is actually collected by asking the users to sit down and rate the videos that they see, right? This is a very tedious task. You have to follow certain guidelines for it, and it's not very realistic to do when you have a real-time streaming solution. Or the problem that I was discussing previously, if you ask the user actually sit down and study, the whole point gets lost, right? Because a viewer watching television, or let's say watching multimedia content on their phones, will not be interested in actually rating the videos, right? So in order to optimize the system, how can we actually get this QoE value? So to get this QoE value, we can use machine learning. That is, we can pre-train the models based on certain other parameters that our system can actually calculate, right? From these calculated parameters, we can actually predict the quality of user experience at that point of time. So for doing this, what we use is a set of objective metrics that are listed here that the computer can easily compute for a received video. And based on this, what we find is that there is a high correlation between these metrics with the QoE. Some of them have lesser correlation, but some of them have a very high correlation, right? So what is proposed next is fusing these features together and then predicting the QoE. So one popular or an important solution that we came out with is actually using these objective metrics and then predicting the QoE score by fusing these features together, by which is known as MFF, multi-feature fusion. And for this solution, we are using ANN and FNN, which are simple machine learning models. So overall, what is done is like different configurations are set for this machine learning model, and we see that which model actually gives us the best predicted value of the QoE, and which combination of these metrics can be used for giving a high, what should I say, a very close prediction of QoE with the actual. And for this, we actually use some existing data sets wherein already the QoE values are reported and the distorted videos are given, for which we have computed these objective metrics, and we also compared with the state of the art. So what we find is the proposed MFF is actually giving the best prediction of the QoE using the objective metrics. And another solution for the QoE prediction using LSTM is also something that we explored. So this previous solution actually used a very simple machine learning model, that is the ANN and FNN. But the next one is using LSTM, which is, and also some dense layers. So this actually model is more complex than the previous one. But what is the advantage of using this is that we can use the no reference and reduced reference metrics as well. Now, what is the no reference and reduced reference? So oftentimes, like when we are sending the information or multimedia content from the server to the client, we don't have the reference at the client. So in order to compute the PSNR or any other objective metric, SSIM, and many other metrics are there, which are full reference. That means to compute that, you should have the reference original video as well. Whereas we already know that during streaming, the distortion has happened in the streamed video. So we don't have the reference to compare with at the receiver, right? So in order to predict QoE, it makes sense to have some models which are using no reference metrics as well, for which the reference video is not required. And this is what we are actually exploring here, that what if we use a combination of these metrics? Some are full reference, some are reduced reference and no reference. And also we explored that with no reference metric, what is the quality of the predicted QoE, right? And we see that this kind of a framework can also be used for the QoE prediction. And as compared to the other methods available in literature, this actually gives us a better prediction of the QoE. So overall, summarizing what I've discussed right now is that machine learning can be used for the resource allocation and adaptive encoding of the multimedia content. And here the multimedia content can be your immersive videos. And also the LSTM, which is another machine learning model, could be used for user behavior prediction in terms of the viewport direction in which a viewer is watching the immersive content. And many other machine learning models like LSTM, CNN, ANN, and FNN could be used for the multimedia QoE prediction. So that is all. I ask you to please share your comments, remarks, or questions now.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your a very informative speech. Yeah. From the audience, any question here, please? Yeah, well, ma'am, thank you very much for joining with us today in our busy schedule. I think if we have any kind of questions from the members over here, they'll just mail you with your to your mail ID. Once again, and just thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much.
Now, I'm very much privileged to just introduce our one more speaker today, Dr. Inakshi Bhattacharya. Before I just call upon ma'am, I would like to just give her an introduction about her. Inakshi Bhattacharya completed her MSc from Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai in 1980, PhD from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai in 1985, and did postdoctoral work at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, USC from 1986 to 88. She was a faculty member in the Department of Physics, IIT Kanpur during 1988 to 91. Since 1991, she has been on the faculty of the Department of Electrical Engineering at IIT Madras and chaired the department during 2010 to 13. She spent a sabbatical year in 2000 at the Micro Machine Products Division of Analog Devices, USC, and a semester at IIT Mandi in 2017. She has played a key role in establishing the Center of NEMS and Nanophotonics at IIT Madras in 2011, which is now a part of the National Nano Electronics Network for Research and Applications. Her expertise is in silicon technology and its interdisciplinary applications. And her current research areas are in MEMS and NEMS, biosensors and nanoporous membranes. She is a senior member of IEEE Electron Devices Society, a distinguished lecturer of the IEEE Sensors Council, and recipient of the Institute of Smart Structures and Systems Distinguished Service Award 2019. She's a member of editorial board of the Journal of Micromechanics and Microengineering, IOP UK, and has authored a monograph titled Biosensing with Silicon, published by Springer Nature in 2021. By seeing the wow profile of ma'am, please just come onto the stage. I also just request Dr. Swagata to just come and just give a bouquet to ma'am. Yes. Yeah. Ma'am, the session is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just give me a few minutes to connect this. Zoom. Yeah, let me go to my mail.
Yeah, ma'am already started the thing.
Yeah, I saw, I saved it here. It is.
Can you slide change it now?
I'll do it in this.
This mic you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do the sharing, then we can start join with computer.
Recording in progress.
Reduce the volume. Reduce system.
Yeah, yeah,
And don't unmute your mic.
yes.
And off it.
Okay, then I'll do the share. I'm in already.
Yeah.
Share screen.
Correct. Keep it.
This one,
Share.
share screen.
Correct. Keep it.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I don't know why the students are sitting so far away. The audience is very sparse.
Mic is here, but
Can you hear?
you can. You don't want to film it.
We can lower it a bit. Yeah, because I tend to walk and fall off if I stand up back. Yeah, you can give me a cover my goods. So thank you for the introduction and thank you, Shagota, for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. I just wish there was more audience. Yeah. It's on?
No, no. You there. Here, no. Over the year.
No, that's not.
Okay, then.
Phone move.
Sorry, unmute.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
Can you hear? Yeah, thanks. Okay, so today I'm going to talk on silicon nanoporous membranes for dialysis. And what are silicon nanoporous membranes? So as you can see in this, it's random distribution of pores.
What defines
Something as
nanoporous is
the membrane thickness should be 5 nanometers, say several microns. The pore diameters also there is
a range, and this is from
1 to 100 nanometers, and you can see that it varies. It's not one single kind of size of pores. It's a little random because it's usually statistical, the formation of pores. So there is some variation in the pore size. You can get membranes of the same pore size by using sophisticated technique like focused ion beam, but they're very expensive. And since we want to use this membrane for applications like enzyme purification, dialysis, etc., it should be as inexpensive as possible. The applications are molecular sieving, dialysis. Many of you may have heard of dialysis, hemodialysis, people who have kidney problem not working properly, they undergo dialysis. But the English word dialysis, what does it mean? It is somewhat similar to filtration, but different. So in filtration, usually you keep out, so if I have a mixture of molecules, you keep out above a certain size. Dialysis, there's some equal. Position. I thought if it's too close, it will get worse. It's okay? Static. So what happens is when you have this distribution in size, right? So some pores might be bigger. So you will not keep out everything. So for example, when we're doing dialysis, we want to remove creatinine and urea, and all of it will not get removed. But as far as, clinical, there enough to separate out enough of toxins. So that is dialysis as opposed to filtration. As I also mentioned, enzyme purification. Enzymes are very important biomolecules. They have a lot of industrial application, and enzymes are characterized by their activity. They're expensive. All of you have heard of Biocon. Biocon made its first money, or it became so famous. Its first product was, which is the enzyme from papaya. The purer the enzyme is, the activity is higher, but it also becomes more expensive. So this could be, these membranes could be, something is happening to the mic. I think it's not catching everything. I think I just use this, not.
So what are membranes made of? Mostly polymers. Our standard hemodialysis systems, which you see in hospitals, they use polymeric membranes. There are also inorganic membranes. Alumina is one. You can buy alumina, that is aluminum oxide membranes commercially. And silicon, family of silicon, silicon nitride, silicon oxide. So our work is mainly on silicon membranes using technologies which we take from IC technology, MEMS processes. So the idea of the membrane is to repeat or to mimic what biological membranes are. So this is a schematic of a typical biological membranes. Biological membranes are formed by lipid molecules. So you can see this a pair of lipid molecules. And in between, there are these larger molecules which kind of open the pores. The system in the body is very complicated. They're actually electrochemical. There's an electrical signal, there is a chemical signal, and only then the pores open up and the molecules pass through. So it is both size as well as charge based. And that's what we're trying to do with this nanoporous membranes. So this is a schematic of a system. We have a mixture of molecules on one side. So the two reservoirs, one is called cis. On the other side is the trans, separated by this nanoporous membrane. The name is nanoporous membrane. I already told you it's very thin. The advantage is that the thickness of the membrane is comparable to the size of the biomolecules. So because of that, there is not that much clogging. Normally, many times these biomolecules, especially in polymeric membranes, which are typically tens of microns thick, the biomolecules can go and clog the pores. And then, of course, it won't work. So you also have less loss of the biomolecules in this, because while we are trying to take out and extract the uremic toxins, you may also lose important protein molecules from the blood. And so we don't want to get those stuck in the membranes and lose them. And because now we are making it out of silicon, which can withstand high temperatures, we can actually autoclave it, and therefore it is reusable. The normal cartridges that they use for dialysis, they're use and throw. In India, because we cannot afford it, typically in hospitals, they would use the same cartridge some 2-3 times for the same patient. And then, of course, they have to discard it. Okay. Yeah. So how do we make this silicon nanoporous membrane? We deposit a thin layer of amorphous silicon, about 15 nanometer thick, between 2 oxide layers, which are also deposited. The oxide layers are slightly thicker. We vary the oxide thickness from 30 to 100 nanometers. So the whole stack is about 215 nanometers or so. Everything deposited by CVD, chemical vapor deposition technology. And then we do a rapid thermal process. And what happens is, now I have a very thin amorphous silicon layer, no crystalline order, constrained between 2 oxides, and there's a phase transition because of the rapid thermal processes are typically 900, 950 degrees centigrade. You ramp it up very fast and bring it down. There is a transition to crystalline phase, and since there isn't enough material, plus there's a constraint, so you get formation of nanocrystals, and spontaneously, therefore, pores form because the atoms move around, and in places it forms. So look at this transmission electron micrograph. The white things are the holes, are the pores. The blacks are the nanocrystals that are formed, and the gray background is the amorphous silicon we started with. The advantage of this is that the sizes are small. We've already talked about the sizes, and this is very important, that a batch fabrication process can be used. So I mentioned already that we use processes in IC technology or MEMS technology. So you can form many of these at the same time, and that is what brings the cost down, because the processing is simple. Because it's thin, transport of biomolecules through this is quite rapid, and silicon is biocompatible. It's not toxic to our body. Of course, you don't want a piece of silicon sticking in your body. But then this is external. It's not in vivo, it's in vitro. You're taking the blood out and passing it through the dialysis system. Of course, because it is so thin, 15 nanometer, it is very fragile, low mechanical strength, and we have to be aware of that. So just a schematic of how we think it forms. So on the right, the yellow is the silicon. The yellow and blue is the silicon oxide, right? Remember, it's amorphous silicon sandwiched between two oxide layers. Okay, now we always have point defects. However good the material is, there are always point defects in the material, and even more so at the interface. So if I have a point defect here, what happens when you annihilate suddenly? That this point defect increases and finally forms a pore. And if you choose the correct temperature and for the right amount of time, and the oxide thickness is also very critical, this pore goes through, and what you get is through holes or through pores. So these are actually for voids which have the nucleation was the point defects, and then finally they form these continuous voids. And you can control the pore characteristics like the dimensions as well as the porosity, how much percentage of it has formed into porous material, by playing around, tuning the annealing conditions, etc. So we start with the silicon wafer, double-sided polished, and we etch what is called as bulk micromachining, etch it in KOH on one side, and we leave a membrane of silicon 5 micron. I don't know if you're familiar with silicon wafers. Silicon wafers are typically 6-inch silicon wafer will be 550 microns thick. So we are dealing with double-sided polish. They're thinner, typically 300 or 250 microns thick. So you can use lithographic techniques, open window on one side, and etch it in KOH. KOH is an anisotropic etchant for silicon. And so you get these angles. This angle is characteristic of the planes. Silicon is a crystalline material. So this is the 111 plane. This is a 100 silicon. And we leave 5 microns out of this 200. Sorry, that should be micron, not nanometer. Out of that 200 microns, 5 micrometer remains. And that is actually a sacrificial layer. Why do I call it a sacrificial layer? We'll see in a minute. So then we deposit these 3 stacked layers using chemical vapor deposition, oxide, amorphous silicon, and oxide. After that, you do the rapid thermal annealing. And that is what it shows here, that there are pores in the amorphous silicon layer. Okay. And then we etch out the silicon using reactive ion etching. That's why it's a sacrificial layer. So it provides the base to deposit the thin films by CVD. And then finally, we etch out the silicon. And lastly, we etch out the oxide, that was sandwiching. And we leave this freestanding 15 nanometer with average pore size 8 to 10 nanometer membrane, which is embedded in a silicon piece. So it's quite easy to handle. So the pores we found using transmission electron micrograph, that they're not circular, they are more elliptic. And so we define them by a major and a minor diameter. And of course, what size it will filter will be decided by the smaller, which is minor. So I already mentioned that there is a distribution of pore size. It's not like a Gaussian distribution or a Poisson distribution. It's random, but you have large number of pores of one size. So for example, this is the minor diameter is between 8 and 10 nanometers. Okay, so first, even before we thought of application as dialysis, we were just looking at how good these are for, limiting, allowing diffusion of different size biomolecules. So we chose 4 different size biomolecules varying from 6 to about 13.5 nanometers. The pore size here, average was 10, but of course there's a variation between 5 and 20 nanometers. And what do we see? Alpha amylase is the smallest one, of 6.4 nanometer size, and that diffuses quite well. So this is the percentage diffusion as a function of time. This is pure diffusion, and all of you know that diffusion is driven by concentration gradient. So it will diffuse fast initially, and then as the concentrations equalize, maximum can be 50%. You see that it saturates and kind of flattens out at the end. So alpha amylase, good. BSA, whose size is 8 nanometer, also diffuses quite well. And then catalase doesn't diffuse that well. Catalase size is 9 nanometer. And xanthine oxidase, another important enzyme of size 13.6 nanometers, hardly diffuses. That's the green one. Okay, so this is fine. We expect it to be size dependent. What is a little curious is that BSA and catalase, they're only different by 1 nanometer, 8 and 9 nanometers diameters. And yet there's quite a difference in their diffuse properties. Why is that so? That is so because biomolecules also have a charge on their surface. So does silicon. The silicon nanopore also will have some charge, because whenever all this, the medium would be an electrolyte. So whenever an electrolyte meets another surface, it always induces charges, what is called as Helmholtz double layer formation. So at the pH that we are working, the silicon will have always a negative charge. So the pore walls are charged negatively. Now, if your biomolecule is charged negatively, what will happen? The pore walls will repel it. And it will be as if the effective pore diameter is smaller than what we measure physically using TEM. On the other hand, if the biomolecules are positively charged, right, then they'll get attracted to the walls. And then again, the pore size becomes smaller. And not only that, we lose biomolecules because now they're stuck on the pore walls. So if we look at the surface charge of BSA and catalase, which size is just 1 nanometer difference in diameter, but the charge, both are negatively charged. BSA has -20 and catalase has -34. That is the reason that catalase sees a smaller effective pore size and the diffusion rate is less. We have tested this because, again, what the surface charge will depend on the pH of the liquid in which all these biomolecules are. And we find that even alpha amylase, which is very small, if we change the pH to, for example, less than 5.4, when it has a net positive charge, it hardly diffuses. So when it's a negative charge, it diffuses well. This is for a limited time. But when it's positively charged, it again goes and sticks to the walls. And this is also seen in BSA. So therefore, just like our natural biological membranes, we can use these silicon nanoporous membranes for charge and size-based separations. Another important thing is enzymes are also proteins. When we look at the biomolecules from the trans reservoir, we find that they remain as it is. If it's an enzyme, the activity remains the same. If it's a protein, the structure remains the same. So the molecules do not get damaged because diffusion is a very passive process. So just to look at this charge and size based transport, we synthesize some zinc oxide nanoparticles and of 2 different sizes. One set was 1 to 4 nanometer. The other set was 20 to 25 nanometers. We're using the same membranes of about average pore size 8 to 10 nanometer dia. And as expected, we see that there's very little, if you look at the total diffusion percentage, for the larger size, there's very little in the trans. This black is the trans, gray is the cis. Whereas as far as the smaller size is concerned, it's almost equal. That is 50% has diffused to the trans reservoir. But when we start changing the charge, and here we made sure that the size doesn't change, only the surface charge changes. So look at this. When it's neutral, right? So gray is the cis and black is the trans. So for both neutral, 0 millivolts, so you can measure the surface charge. A measure of the surface charge is something called as a zeta potential, which you can experimentally measure. And so when the zeta potential is 0, which means no charge, neutral, we get good diffusion. If it's small negative also, the diffusion doesn't get that affected. It's, the -5 volts also, the gray and black are quite close to the neutral value. But when the negative charge, negative potential on the biomolecules increases, obviously the effective pore size is much less and you don't get much diffusion. When the charge on the biomolecule is positive, it's much worse because immediately it will start sticking to the walls and you see that you get very less diffusion. So as long as it's neutral, the biomolecule, or it has small negative charge, and of course the pores are also negatively charged, it is effective for diffusion. We went ahead and did this since we wanted applications with biomolecules to see if bacteria and yeast can pass through these SNMs. And you might ask why look at this at all, because bacteria is quite large, 1 to 2 micron, half a micron in diameter, much larger than what our pore size is. I already mentioned that pore formation is statistical. And when we look at TEM, how much ever we try, we cannot look at every point, every corner of that membrane. So if statistically in some corner there's one large pore, then it's possible that a bacteria or yeast can go through. So we did a culture, and in a culture, even if one bacteria or one yeast passes, it would multiply, and we see actually nothing goes through. You can see 3 and 4, one is the control and one is the trans, and it has no growth of either bacteria or yeast. So it is immune to yeast and bacteria. And next, we wanted to do this for virus, because virus is even smaller. And this was done in CMC Vellore, Christian Medical College, in the laboratory of Dr. Asha Abraham, who's a virologist there. And this was done quite some time back, 2016. So 2014, 15, I think we did this measurement. I mentioned this because that time we didn't know what PCR was. They gave us the virus sample. We didn't have a hood for doing measurements with virus. That's why we went there. So they gave us the samples, they gave us the PCR data. We only did the experiment of the diffusion. Of course, now we are all experts on PCR. So, so both were good. That is, it didn't pass through the membrane. Poliovirus 30 nanometer and influenza is about 80 to 100 nanometers. And the membrane didn't allow either of them to pass. Okay, so now we are ready to try this application in a dialyzer. So what is conventional hemodialysis? They're big floor-based systems. In India, they're only done in hospitals. In the West, they have just dedicated dialysis centers. So typically, people have to undergo this depending on how badly their kidneys are affected. So 4 hours, thrice a week or twice a week. And the clearance rate is about 30 milliliters per minute. So this is what we have to achieve. The problem is, if for some reason there's a break, it could be a natural disaster. For some reason, they could not reach the hospital. And that's what we call the interdialytic period. All that toxin accumulates and it can be fatal. So that's why there is, really room for portable and wearable systems, hemodialysis systems, which maybe the patient can use at home. And it's not too complicated. They can use it without needing any medical personnel. So it's very important for the core of the system would be the membrane, highly efficient membranes. And that's what we thought we'll examine our SNMs for. So this is a typical standard hemodialysis systems that you see in the hospital. What it uses is this cartridge. And this cartridge, I told you, it's polymeric and it's actually rolled up. It's quite long. And if you look at the cartridge, on one side, there's blood flowing from the body and back into the body. The other side is what is called as the dialysate. And the membrane is in between. And so they're flowing at different rates. Usually the dialysate flows at a faster rate. Why? Because you want to constantly measure the concentration gradient. So as fresh dialysate comes, it maintains the concentration gradient. So again, this part moves, the blood moves back to the body and the uremic toxins would have transferred to the other one. So this is our standard hemodialysis system. What do we have now in the market in terms of portable hemodialyzer? Not too many things. And so there are these companies, Baxter, Next Stage, etc. They have been around for many years, but in standard hemodialysis. Many of you would know that medical, getting into any applications in the medical field is very difficult, the number of tests and regulations, which as it should be. But we have an advisor who's a nephrologist, and he said in the last 3 or 4 decades, there's been no improvement or any change in technology in this area in hemodialysis. So, so clearly there is room for one. This last one, Japanese, this is supposed to come out in the market in 2023. Again, it's shaped like a briefcase, but none of them use the membranes that we are talking about. Okay, so this is again the schematic, cis trans with the membrane in between. And so we first wanted to see if it clears urea, creatinine, etc. And we made solutions with 1 millimolar of urea and 0.088 millimolar of creatinine in a phosphate buffer. And so first thing we noticed is that the urea sticks to the silicon surface, right? And we need to really get it out of the system. So we had to do some surface functionalization, surface treatment, so that the urea doesn't adhere to the surface and can escape. And we could verify this by doing FTIR measurements. And we tried different treatments, surface functionalization. Finally, what worked was something called as Glymo plus an acid treatment. And we got no binding of urea at the end of it. So henceforth, we'll only talk about functionalized SNMs. Okay, so this is the result for urea as well as creatinine. We could clear much more when we started trans replacement. That is, the trans reservoir was replaced 4 times, not a continuous flow. Finally, we do continuous flow, but in this, we just replace the trans solution. We could clear up to 79% of urea and 90% of creatinine. You don't really need to get such high numbers. We just saw how much, we're checking how much we could push it to. So this is our present system. We have peristaltic pumps on both sides. So this is side, so this would be the human blood being pumped by the heart. And on the other side, again, we'll need a pump to drive the dialysate in. What we would do, we would run this for a given time and then take out the cis and trans liquids and measure what the concentration is using standard biochemical methods. So the numbers I told you, by replacing, we got a very high rate of clearance. But now next point is how to increase the throughput, because so far we are just using one silicon nanoporous membrane. So we changed the single membrane to an array of membranes, 3 by 3. We also made different masks to reduce the gap between the two. The process is still the same. Only thing, now we get much more, the effective area for dialysis increases. And when we use these arrays using 3 by 3 membranes, and now we also increase the the concentration of urea to 10 ml instead of 1 ml. And within 45 minutes, we could get 50% clearance diffusion. So we do, as I said, 80%, 75% we can achieve by doing more rate of trans replacement, but it's really not necessary. So now what we want to do is, still the rate is not enough as compared to what I reported earlier. So we have designed these modular structures, and the idea is to stack as many of them as possible. We also tried flow, which could be laminar or it could be circular. And we have been steadily increasing the volume, 30 ml. Actually, now we have even 50 ml volume of this, and built in our workshop out of Teflon, because that's another biocompatible material. And as you can see that all of this, we get clearance of about approximately 50%, but look at the time taken. It has steadily reduced with an increase in volume. So we are reaching the rates that they get with the standard hemodialysis setup. So here are some more numbers, again, using single nanoporous membrane and membrane array. And these are pictures of our systems. So first we started with this semicircular, and now we are doing the laminar, which gives a higher rate. And they're also hexagonal, so they're easier to stack. So what do we see? With single membrane, we got 50% clearance in 2 hours, right? When we did the trans replacement, we got 77% clearance, just urea I'm talking about, and 87% with creatinine. But when we used an array, we got 50% clearance in about half an hour. So again, assay was using standard biochemical techniques. If you're going to use it for hemodialysis, they have to be biocompatible. We have done biocompatibility tests. These are certified labs, certified by the government, and whatever, they're very expensive. So we didn't do all the tests. We have done some of the tests, and so far they are hemocompatible and they don't have cytotoxicity. That is, the cells, there's no toxicity introduced into the system. We now have some collaboration with Savita Medical College, and some of the tests are ongoing there now. So let's look at the current status of membrane. So polysulfone is a polymeric membrane, but it's one of the newer membranes. So it can be thinner compared to the others. It's still 265 microns. Okay. But the rest of them are all silicon based, nanoporous silicon nitride, because silicon nitride is a stronger material than silicon. Then polysilicon slits, again, silicon nanoporous, and ours. And what do we see? The sizes, the membrane thickness matches for most of the silicon ones. Well, ours is really 15 nanometer, much less than the other ones. So for the nanoporous silicon nitride, they put the 20 nanometer membrane in a very thick polymer scaffolding. So overall thickness is more. And both coated and uncoated. So this PET is a standard material for this coating to prevent the biofouling, but it's expensive, and with long use, it can also be toxic to human system. Glymo is not. So that was a good thing. We have not patented because we have published most of our results. And, you know, in India, industries don't come up to take this up. If anyone will take it up, I'll give it free. We don't need any patenting for that. To look at the rates, so this conventional PSU that I talked about last, the clearance area is so much larger, almost 5,000 square millimeter. Our area is 0.44. But look at the rates, they're all within the same ballpark. Ours is 0.8. So even with this 3x3 array, and when we stack it, we can improve it even more. We get a comparable clearance rate to standard hemodialysis setup. Okay, so I already mentioned it's very fragile because it's 15 nanometer. Our blood cells weigh much more. So we thought we'll use 2 filters and one with larger pore size, few microns, to keep the blood cells away. And we started with porous silicon because it's a well-known material, very easy to make. You can lift off the membrane. And so we got this 50 micron thick porous silicon material with 1 to 2 micron diameter. And the idea is to first use this larger pore size membrane and then use the nanoporous membrane. So it does clear the blood quite well. You can see on the left, we don't have any blood cells. And it works. Only problem is this turned out to be even more fragile because this nanoporous membrane is embedded in the crystalline silicon wafer. So it's easier to handle. But this porous silicon, because it's lifted off, it was very difficult to handle. And we also had reproducibility problem. We have switched to SU8 now. SU8 is a very soft material and quite easy to peel off. And this works quite well. So as you can see, we also designed a holder, and this is after the filtration, and all the blood cells are left behind. Now, we still have some ways to go, because remember, these blood cells have to be put back into the body. And right now we are just showing that it works, it separates the blood cells, but we have to design a system where they will flow back into the blood again. And a big problem in hemodialysis is loss of proteins, because albumin. So in fact, the patients who undergo dialysis have to orally take albumin. So we thought if we reduce the pore size, then maybe we can, creatinine and urea are very small molecules. Protein is a little bigger, they're I think 7 to 8 nanometers. So we made some silicon nanoporous membranes with 5 to 6 nanometer pores. And the same 6x6 array we use. And this is an SDS space study where they see what are the atoms, what are the protein molecules that have gone through. And we found that we could arrest everything with a size greater than 65 kilodalton. So we could arrest the loss of albumin without affecting the clearance of the uremic toxins. So all this is good. In summary, we made 15 nanometer thick silicon nanoporous membranes. The surface functionalization prevented. So even albumin doesn't stick because of the surface functionalization. And we can easily clear about 40 to 45% of both urea and creatinine, and retain the albumin, retain the proteins which are useful. We should not lose them. And also it doesn't allow any of pathogens like bacteria, yeast, or even virus to get through the other side. So therefore, these membranes are suitable for portable dialysis unit. We have to see how to proceed further. So this work been doing for more than 10 years now, several PhD students, many postdocs from they are the Sudeshna, Priyanka, they're all biotech background. As you know, when we were students, maths and biology separated in 9th class, and never the twain shall meet. But I had a very good collaborator, Professor Anju Chadha, biotechnology. She retired 2 years back. So I had to learn a lot of biology. But all the students who worked are electrical engineering students. And we have Dr. Georgie Abraham as an advisor from Madras Medical. And the funding is from this center, which was funded by MIT, and now it's funded by MIT and IST. Thank you. Okay.
How much is the cost advantage of this SNM?
So silicon is not an inexpensive material. It is, the material cost of silicon is, but when you do in batch mode, the prices come down. You can see in integrated circuits, the prices. So if it is made in large numbers, the cost will be viable. You have a question? Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you.
I saw the devices, and you also mentioning that there should not be any help of any medical assistance, and any patient can use that. So I'm just wondering how, like, what will be that working principle? So,
It died.
okay, so what will be the working principle? So it will be like without any medical assistance, the device can be so
you need-
handy.
Of course, you need a port, which is there. I think even for standard dialysis, they keep the port, the
Mhm.
dialysis port. They don't keep, I mean, especially when it's done.
Yeah,
quite
okay,
often.
okay, now I got it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but the size is very different.
Mhm.
People, when we present this, they keep asking, will this fit in the standard hemodialysis? No, the whole system has to be changed,
Okay.
but it's very portable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Very nice talk.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for the informative speech. Now I just request Dr. Prajit to just give the memento to ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Aman. Aman. No, not PLC, this thing. Auditorium. Yes, sir, that I have WhatsApp you that link, and you just click and. Okay, okay. Okay, sir. We are, this time will be another. Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Sir, we are sharing the meeting details with you. You can join them. On that, your mail separately also. Oh, that's it. Thomas.